There are two powerful stories. The first one, unfortunately, from the first reading from 2 Samuel, you missed the intro to the story with King David. How many of you have read that from 2 Samuel? So you know, David took Uriah's wife, called Bathsheba, in effect raped her. She became pregnant, and David, trying to cover it up, tried to get Uriah. Uriah was a soldier fighting for David, and tried to get him to have relations with his wife so that it wouldn't be blamed on him. And when that didn't work, he had Uriah in one of the battles. He had told his general to put Uriah in front, and then when the battle was fiercest, to pull back the army and leave Uriah alone to be slaughtered by the enemy. Murder. And he thought he could get away with it. And he almost did. You know, all those things. And but it was Nathan who challenged him. And I encourage you to read the chapters before that. Those are chapters 10, I think, starting in chapter 10 of 2 Samuel. It's a brilliant challenge to get David himself to understand the depth of his sin. And you heard in the gospel, in the reading today, that he says, God gave you everything. He gave you the kingdom, he gave you the rule, he even gave you the wives of Saul, the person you replaced. He gave you everything. What more could he have done? And yet you have taken the wife of Uriah. And of course, had him killed in effect. David, you heard, repents, and God forgives him. It is a heinous sin of a powerful man who gets what he wants when he wants it. And so I encourage you to read it to understand how we can go astray. The gospel, we don't know what the woman's sin is, right? I mean, you can assume you know. I could assume I know. But the one thing that everybody agrees, including the woman herself, is that she is a sinner. Simon, the Pharisee who invited Jesus to dinner, and everybody in town, I guess, knows she's a sinner. She knows she's a sinner, and Jesus knows she's a sinner, right? No one says, oh, you really, it isn't a sin. No. It's apparently, you can fill in the blank. We know what David did, or at least we know some of what David did. But we don't know. But we know that everyone is unanimous, including the woman herself, that she has sinned. But the power of this, every time I read this reading, I cannot imagine how reconciled she must have been to put on such a public display. I can't imagine how free she was to be able to come and to literally be so sobbing that her tears could wash someone's feet, to dry them with her hair, to not stop kissing them, to anoint them with precious ointment. This is a woman set free. You notice Jesus doesn't say, I forgive your sins. He just says your sins are forgiven. My imagination is that she had already experienced that Jesus had forgiven her sins. That she had to come to him and say, as the Lord of the universe, as the person who set her free, and with abandon, complete abandon, gives her whole heart and soul in such a public way before all of her enemies and before everybody in town who knew she was a sinner. I admire how deeply touched she is. Someone was giving a meditation on this reading, And she said that she wished, she focused, this lady focused on the same thing. To be so free, to know so deeply where your salvation lies. To respond with all your heart, without abandon and without shame, to your Lord and God. I hope I have, by the grace of God, of course, that grace to respond without shame and with all my heart to the mercy of God for me, to the overwhelming power of His love in my life. And I pray for you the same thing. Because, of course, there are other people in this story, right? Simon can only see her sin. He doesn't, and nobody in the room thinks, except that woman, perhaps, that Jesus is the source of forgiveness. You remember at the end they say, who is this that forgives sins? Maybe they didn't know where their sin was. Maybe they were one who got 50 days, I don't know, forgiven. But they certainly didn't recognize who they were having dinner with. This woman without limit knows who He is. He is the source of God's reconciliation and peace. And Jesus Christ is the source of God's reconciliation and peace for me and for you, just as much as it was for that woman. And I pray for you, and as I said, I pray for myself, that you might have the grace someday, with all your heart, to let go of your sins and to come to Jesus without shame, to be totally reconciled to Him by the grace of God, by the power of His love in your life. And so, enough said. Right? Enough said.